Hey friends, this is Pastor Clay Lundberg coming to you from Zion United Methodist Church with a little bit of a different video. It's my intention to have a video each day of Holy Week, a short video to describe the events of that day and how those events all work together to bring Jesus on this great journey from Palm Sunday, this day where the crowd proclaimed Hosanna and named him as the one who is coming in the name of the Lord. And how that same crowd only a few days later would cry out for his crucifixion because they had no king but Caesar. So each of these videos will explain the events of the day that led to the cross, starting with the day that Jesus cleansed the temple. Now, just yesterday in worship, we commemorated the day called Palm Sunday. The day where the crowds did indeed cut down the palm fronds and lay them at the feet of Jesus and shout and cry Hosanna to the Son of David. And all seemed right because it seemed like everybody understood who Jesus was. But it wouldn't last. Maybe because of what happened next. On that day in Palm Sunday, Jesus overturned the expectations of the crowd. And on the day that followed, Jesus overturned the tables in the temple because all believers in that entire area would have had to come to the temple in Jerusalem, would have had to come into the temple courts and make their sacrifices. And for some families, that meant bringing with them the sacrifice that they would bring to the temple. But other families weren't as lucky. Other families had to buy something once they got to the temple grounds to make their sacrifice. And the problem with that is that there was a currency system that existed only in the temple. And so money from outside of the temple had to be turned into money that could be used inside of the temple. And the interesting thing about that is that the exchange rate always benefited the temple and never benefited the people of God. And so when Jesus saw the people being taken advantage of, when Jesus saw the temple enriching themselves on the back of those that had come to give their sacrifices, it was just too much for him to take. And so we read in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 21, verses 12 and 13, Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were selling and buying in the temple, and he overturned the table of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, and you are making it a den of robbers." Friends, so often we think of Jesus as just the baby in the manger. Or we see Jesus as the one who is on the cross, who had no words of his own defense and took all of the punishment. But that's not all of who he was. That's not all of Jesus' identity. Jesus is also the one that cared very deeply about the holiness of the temple and the holiness of God's people. And when there was something that stood in the way of holiness being expressed, it was too much for him. And so he took action. Jesus came to restore the faith of the people of God so that they would not act like this anymore. And when he saw this happening in the temple, it was just too much. My house is to be a house of prayer, and you've turned it into a den of robbers. The question that today invites us to ask is, what is it that you and I do that distracts us from living a life of holiness and prayer the way that Jesus intended for us to live? And maybe these days of Holy Week are a time for us to pause and consider. Maybe this day that the temple is cleansed is a time for us to look at our own lives and ask what needs to be cleansed in us. And then we do the hard work of cleansing so that we can live how Jesus intends for us to live, where we can say that our life is a house of prayer and not a house of anything else. See you tomorrow.